and then we'll get into the meeting. So I'm gonna see if I can figure out who's all on screen. Can we take down, so welcome everyone to Energy Strategy. conversations that, kind of didn't blow up in the room, that felt really respectful, that offered opportunities for folks to bring their ideas into the space. There was appreciation for kind of the data analysis and scenario planning that went into it, and some specific spaces where, as you can see on the slide, just some of the topic areas that were really important. We'll come back to those things like resilience, things that cut across or cross-cutting actions, right? The embedding of and consideration of equity impacts that were built into the process. Certainly, there was appreciation on kind of aligning kind of the direction with an emphasis on electrification, thinking about energy efficiency as really core and central pathways to how we as a state advance in this work. There was a appreciation of the recognition of this challenge that large loads, including data centers, and the challenges that will continue to emerge as we try to solve for this broader issue. And then really recognizing and appreciating the critical nature of the sovereign relationship through tribal engagement and the importance of that obligation as a state. So a number of strengths, and again, this is a highlight, but certainly I think, as I said this, the attempt, many folks describe things like, I appreciate how difficult it must have been for Odo, right? To take in all of these type of perspectives and try to represent and reflect back something that truly tried to capture, I shouldn't say truly, they tried to capture all that was heard and put forward in this process. If you go to the next slide. On the other side of that coin, there was a number of concerns that were shared. And there was a number of things as it related to things like prioritization that came up from everything from, the clarity around vision and goals, and really just having a stronger sense of laying that out, recognizing the challenge of doing this work, and again, relative to the equity impacts and need to balance, right? The cost to, at lots of different levels, but particularly the cost to those who would be most kind of negatively impacted or burdened by the costs of some of the transition and shifts in towards electrification. Some of the models and structures that folks talked about is, that loans often are really challenging for low-income people, so focusing on grants instead of that. This word realistic, which probably should be bolded and highlighted and capitalized and all the things, came up over and over again. Right. And we'll come back to this as one of the key issues, but the idea of what's realistic, what can we do in the short term, where do we start, when and how do things happen, right? And Edith's already talked about that tension between a kind of strategy that sets direction and what I took away, which is a lot of yearning for, well, what are we going to do and how are we going to do it and how's that going to get done and what are we going to prioritize and start with? So that theme, right, connected also to specificity, to sequencing, to really saying, in a budget environment that Edith described, how do you kind of triage the near, mid, and long-term actions? How do you designate as, again, Edith tried to reflect back on this, it's not just Odo. Right, so who's going to do what and how's that going to happen? And just a lot of conversations that just for me reflect a real desire to kind of get into it, right? And to answer some really complicated questions around how this work can happen and who's going to do it. There was clarity in terminology, so we provided some examples. Some of that was process-based, shifts in language, pathways and pillars, the COU versus IOU, and some of the unique attributes, limitations, constraints, opportunities as it relates to, different type of utilities. Strategic electrification was brought up. That was a word that was used that maybe didn't have as much clarity as folks would have liked. There was agreement on reliability and resilience, and we'll come back to this in one of the key issue areas. Those are really important things to prioritize, but it was clear that as folks were using language like reliability or language like resilience, the perspectives really varied. And as an objective observer, those interest-based perspectives of how people talked about this is how we're going to maintain reliability or this is how we're going to ensure resilience was pretty clear that those were very varied perspectives and interest-based perspectives in terms of how folks were talking about that. Certainly, as I think could be expected, there was mixed views on fuels. So, whether it's fuel switching, whether it's, how we talk about and think about natural gas as kind of a bridge fuel, it gets back to some of the realism and timelines and those type of pieces. The recognition and maybe lack of discussion around propane's relationship to particularly rural resilience. And reliability, right? So there's a number of things right, just around fuels and fuel usage and transition. And as Edith said in her example, the urgency of transmission and siting. So while, I think folks name things like how do we, the importance of streamlined permitting, the alignment kind of with and across authorities, right? This tension with land use and ultimately feasibility, right? And this is, I'll come back to this, but it's a illustrative example because it was one of those tension points that I think created some frustration, right? We know it's hard. If we didn't know it was hard, we wouldn't talk about it. How do we get it done? And I think, Edith kind of alluded to, this doesn't answer all the hows on something that's as complex, and we heard it as really complex around how do you solve this kind of challenge that we have watched, whether it's just timelines, whether it's litigation and cost, whether it's this balance between what we value as a state and what we need as a state. Which can be in real tension. And then, while folks lifted up the embedding of equity in the conversation, I think there was also kind of that other side is how do you build that even stronger into the considerations, both for actions that we take, but also for the type of resources and funding that will alleviate some of the disparate or unequal burden, particularly for low-income Oregonians. So at a very high level, those concerns and priorities. If we go to the next slide. So I'm going to move into, and we did our best to try to break down issue by issue. And this is a place where I hope, if for folks that are multitasking, I think this is the place to, center in on these topics, because I do think we want to open up the floor after we reflect on these. So if we go next slide. As I alluded to, I don't know if there was one other topic that came up more in our conversations than and I think Jen Bees, to put you on the spot a little bit, I think you said it at our very first meeting very specifically, how are we considering what's realistic? And I think, to a person that we talked to, and I think in a lot of our conversations, this was one of the things that folks really held as an issue, as a concern, and a challenge, and as an opportunity, right? How do we ground these strategies and ultimately ground kind of where we go next in practical feasibility, right? What can we actually do, right? Within all these constraints that, Edith alluded to some of them, you all have brought them forward throughout this process. How do we do it in the world that we operate and live in? Acknowledging, right, these barriers, these cost limitations, the budget constraints, right? There's a lot of things that when we talked about and heard people talk about reality and feasibility and pragmatic, there was a lot of ways that people named it, but certainly connected to some of those acknowledgements and recognizing, some of those things are called out. But there was a depth of, well, then what do we do with this, right? Saying it's hard is not going to help us get to that next step. And I think we heard that as a challenge going forward. And then, this kind of other piece around what's realistically achievable in the near term. And I know we didn't spend a lot of time in this process really talking about and nor does the strategy really say what are we prioritizing in terms of the exact sequencing, but that is something that maybe we come back to later and something that I think folks were kind of yearning for. If we go to the next slide. Reliability, again, as I alluded to earlier, people talked about this in different ways. But thinking about resource and load growth was really important. How do we kind of maintain a system that can stay on and serve, human beings and industries and business and all the things that, energy provides for our lives. And then, this connection again, and you'll see this as a recurring theme to connecting to transmission planning. And how do we resolve this issue of increased demand alongside the focus on electrification? We know there's growing demand, as I called out earlier, and people mentioned, the onboarding of large load and data centers is a unique and ongoing challenge for the state, and how that relates to reliability is one that is a stress point and pain point potentially. If you go to the next slide. Folks, again, talked about resilience in lots of different ways. I think one of the pieces that came up in a few of our conversations is not just to focus on kind of the global infrastructure, right? I mean, Oregon global infrastructure, but community level preparedness. And ensuring and thinking about the role of distributed energy around having flexibility for demand and backup capacity, right? How do you ensure that our systems can kind of prepare, respond, and recover as we know there's so many impacts that threaten resilience. And to that point, right, that households, right, and not losing resilience for human beings that are impacted when systems go down or when they are slow to recover. Just making sure that we're naming that explicitly. And again, this theme around drawing a distinction between kind of the system, the utility system, and community is important, and maybe not something that folks saw jumping onto the strategy. And then just recognizing, right, whether it's extreme risks, whether it's weather risks, whether it's wildfires, right, other utility scale challenges, right, that we just have to have, again, to use the term intentionally, we have to have kind of a realistic understanding of those threats to the system, and how do we integrate those challenges into the way that we think about strategy and is the way we think about direction going forward. So you go to the next slide. I've already hit on this a bit, but in multiple ways, folks talked about, kind of the impacts around the energy wild analysis and rising energy costs. I mentioned earlier, kind of the limited effectiveness of loan programs versus grants. Again, that's a budget, an investment, need and potential constraint. And then, I think folks talked about this in a lot of different ways, but, a real need for a transparent cost analysis. And what does it actually cost to do it? And I think, Alan, you've said it a number of times, right? This is the modeling was a least cost option scenario or modeling approach. But then how do you tie that then to these very particular types of strategies and actions? If you go next slide. Land use. I think we've hit on this a few times. Edith, I appreciate you using it as an example. I think there was both a reflection back. I wish we had this conversation more in depth, even if it was going to be potentially challenging. But, there was a real desire, and maybe that's part of the discussion we end up having today on kind of how do we balance land use? And we can think about the role of a transmission authority to help answer those type of questions. But how do we think about land use, the use and user clarity for how we cite and the tools we have for citing, and how do we resolve these conflicts that I think everyone in the room, we've talked about it a number of times, that actually stall projects and get in the way of building the type of infrastructure that is necessary to have the type of transmission system that we need to get to where we're trying to go. So again, there was a number of ways that folks that we talked to reflected on that. You can go to the next slide. I think to Edith, your point around that this isn't a plan, right? I think there was just an overarching commentary on wanting that, right? And so I can't say it any different, right? Folks wanted to know, like, where do we start, right? Who's going to do it? How do we get this done? How are we sequencing it in a way that makes sense for all the entities around, this table and others? That it's a roadmap that really provides, right, that timeline for how we can accomplish what we're trying to do as a state. And then really the desire to see those priorities and to think about priorities as it's related to what came out of the modeling. And then again, I think we were really intentional about real world feasibility, right? Again, we heard this over and over and over again, right? How do we actually do this? The strategy, I think folks really reflected strategy kind of calls stuff out, but it doesn't answer the question. And I think that was just it's a point of frustration. It's an issue that folks raised. Go next slide. So I'm going to pause there. I just, well, we can go to the next slide, I think, right? So I did want to, I don't know if Edith, you wanted to reflect back at all. What I want to do in this conversation is, we're kind of putting those key issues up on the table. We are going to move into a discussion. So I think particularly starting with folks we didn't talk to, now that you've heard some of the themes from your colleagues, if there's anything that you think is missing or anything that you'd add. And then I really do want to open up a conversation for the group. Now that you've all kind of heard from each other, you've had these conversations with our team, you've heard that reflection back. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? What do you want to lift up? What do you want to reemphasize? So I'm going to pause there. Did you want to?
Yeah, no, I want to open it up so we can have discussion. I'll just say that I think I think it'll be helpful to consider that we're finalizing the energy strategy and already thinking about kind of what the next steps are and how we help define some of those details. And so I don't think we need to feel constrained by one or the other because they're sort of overlapping. So I think, to the extent that that's helpful, I think it's, I just want to recognize that I think, as Ben said, some of the comments might be because we haven't fleshed out some of the detail. And I think that your comments also help us think about how we can be helpful in doing that once the energy strategy is published, in addition to considering where we might strengthen some of the language or provide more clarity in how the specific pathways, policies, actions are framed.
Okay. So was there anything else about that slide? We're good.
I'm good.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Gone off script.
Yeah. So if we go to the next slide. So as I said, we want to, and we'll flash this up. We can throw it in the chat for memory. But I do want to start, folks that didn't have the chance to have a conversation with us, if there's things that you're missing from those topic lists, and can we flash that back just really quickly for people's memory, the boxes?
And maybe we can rest there for a little bit to just.
In the boxes?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to open it up. So we'll just leave this on the screen for a minute, but then I do want to open it up. So if you didn't have a chance to interview with us, I do want to start with folks that didn't get the chance to have this conversation. And one, is there anything missing? Right? Do you want, is there something that came up for you as you've reviewed the strategy that's not captured in what I just reflected? And quite honestly, folks, we did our best in 15 minutes to try to reflect back hours of conversation. But for folks that didn't get to chat, is there anything missing from what we said, or is there anything that you want to lift up? And then once we've kind of exhausted that opportunity for folks that didn't have the chance to interview, I want to open it back up to the whole group, right? You've heard from each other, you've been part of this process. What's coming up for you now? What do you want to emphasize, lift up? What's maybe a new thought that you haven't had? So starting with folks that, and you know who you are, that didn't get the chance to have that conversation, I'd like to start there. And we can use the raised hand function. I can't see.
I'll keep that.
Okay. Oh yeah, they'll show up there.
And Jessica's also watching the chat. So if anybody puts anything in the chat, she's here to make sure we catch that.
If folks memorize the boxes, can we take them down so we can see, at least in the room, we can see folks? Okay. Yeah, jump in.
Thank you. Rebecca Smith, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. We were not able to connect for an interview. So I'll just throw a couple of things out with the understanding that if they don't fit best within issues and they're kind of a next step, we can certainly table them. When you talked about reliability, reality and feasibility, I think that there's another dimension that fits there, and that's transparency. Because as we talk about grounding things in reality, sorry, and trying to determine what's actually feasible, I think there needs to be a clear understanding of kind of what we're considering as feasible, what we're saying, okay, that's within the realm of possibility versus what might just be discarded out of hand. Are there specific policies that we're considering, very specifically, like absolutely a transmission authority is the way to go and we're going to push that versus, maybe a market-based program like cap and trade would help solve a lot of our funding problems, but we don't think that's feasible given how many runs we've taken at it before. So I think just having a better sense of transparency of what universe of options we're actually considering is feasible is going to be really valuable, especially if and when Odo or another entity takes on the work of hopefully doing a tactical plan that fits with the strategic plan. And then I'm not sure if it fits within the overall goal of what the strategy is, but looking for some greater quantification of what some of those trade-offs are. I think that the strategy work did a really great job of enumerating what a lot of those trade-offs are, identifying them. And I think this is a long-term goal, but in terms of better trying some way to quantify those so that we can actually sit down and be like, okay, all of these things are important to us, but we have to pick three.
Yeah.
So how do we quantify what that means in some sense? If we want land use considerations, if we want equity, but if we also want to keep costs down in the near term, but we also want to speed to action because the shot clock on the climate is actually running. How do we rank those?
So there's a piece around prioritization, I guess, and we're not going to live interview everyone that says something, so I promise I won't do that. But were there things as you reviewed the strategy that were of particular interest to cost out? Or is that a general comment?
Well, I think it's more, when I think about kind of the flower diagram that we saw a lot that had kind of a lot of those considerations, which I think is, same as trade-offs. One that I definitely felt wasn't maybe as clearly included as I would have liked is that time element. Are we just looking out to 10, 20 years and then just trying to fill that like a gas with all of our policies? Or is there a sense of urgency in there, but then also an understanding of how that can affect some of the other levers? Like, yes, we can act quickly, but equity is going to take a hit. Cost of power is going to take a hit or what have you.
Yeah, thank you, Rebecca. Others, Tucker?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I appreciate it. And I want to start just by saying the monumental lift that was ahead of Odo in developing this is I think you really framed it well, Ben, and just how challenging this can be. I don't envy the task, because when you have this many people weighing in and representing different stakeholder groups and whatnot, it is nearly impossible to draft the perfect document. So I know it was a really challenging task ahead of you. I want to also say I think there is probably, as Edith said, you start sort of areas of agreement and try to build from there. I think there's probably, broadly speaking, big picture wise, a lot of areas that there is agreement around the table, and I'll touch on some of that. But I do think it's important sort of to highlight that this is not just a conversation happening with a bunch of us around this table on politically sensitive topics. This is actually real life policy that has real world implications for Oregonians across the state. And my worry is that the draft that we saw in some ways lacks some seriousness when it comes to how those policy recommendations will have impacts to Oregonians. I think that when you look at the demand increases that have been forecasted over the next decade, and the great challenge we're going to have in meeting those, and at the same time, you look at the challenges we're already hearing about and seeing when it comes to meeting the state's clean energy ambitions. I think when you look at it through that lens, and understand that we need to sort of dramatically increase both the pace of development of new energy resources, but also look at new technologies that we're maybe not considering in this state to meet that. When you consider that we're not really acknowledging how challenging it can be to rely on renewable energy resources without firm baseload power and the role that firm baseload power plays in that. When you're not acknowledging that because of resources like the Federal Columbia River Power System, for example, the geographic majority of Oregon, which is served by consumer-owned utilities, already has an extremely strong foundation with baseload renewable resources to actually electrify an economy to the scale that we've talked about as a state. When you don't build a strategy on some of those critical truths like that exist in this space for much of the state, and you shift a lot of the costs, I think, through different policy actions, whether in this document or even recently announced relitigating Federal Columbia River Power System, for example, you're sort of shifting costs and risk to the Oregonians around the state, rural Oregonians around the state who already have that strong foundation. And I think when you're doing that, I look at the strategy in its entirety and I say, I think we're missing the mark on some really critical pieces of this. I think a serious strategy builds off the existing foundation we have, which is a really strong one. I think it's one of the strongest in the country when you look at some of the renewable resources that are at our disposal already. I think a serious strategy focuses on the realities of energy demand and recognizes the limitations of various generation resources in meeting that demand. I think it recognizes the challenges of energy efficiency technologies and how far they can truly be pushed to help us meet that demand. I think it acknowledges the rather urgent timelines we are operating under, and I think it seeks to develop recommendations that mirror that urgency. I think standing up a new agency in the Transmission Authority and giving it the time it needs to actually pass the legislature, staff up, and carve out its role. I don't think that necessarily mirrors the urgency. I think it actually maybe could add more bureaucracy to that, and it could frankly slow the process. I'm not sure. I'd have to go back and listen to the hearings on this in the legislature, but I'm not really sure that the utility industry was saying this is what we need to build more transmission and that this would solve our challenge here. I think suggesting a study of new technologies like nuclear, I was glad to see that was in there, but it feels like that's a recommendation that's a decade or two late. I think it's probably, we've reached a point when you look at forecasts for energy demand, electricity demand, I think we probably need to be recommending to the state that we do away with our ban on building those technologies and open up the state to that development. And I think recreating or duplicating some energy efficiency rebate programs that are already administered is not necessarily additive. And I don't know that it really moves the needle for us. And I think studying microgrids seems like another recommendation that is a few years late. The legislature just passed legislation that's meant to greatly reform that process. I think that the legislature's already sort of considered that. And I'm not sure that really speeds up our timelines or helps us meet our energy goals. But I do think that there's a ton of agreement around the table. And I think I heard over the last year, it really didn't matter what stakeholder group was speaking. We agree on a lot of things. We agree that we need more energy in this region and in this state, and we need it pretty quickly. I think we all agree that transmission is one of the challenges we're facing in getting there. I think we know we're not building it fast enough, and we haven't been for a really long time. I think we also mostly all agree that to the greatest extent possible, if we can meet those energy needs through the cleanest possible energy technologies, I think that's a good thing. I didn't hear a lot of people saying we need to start building coal-fired power plants in the state of Oregon, right? I did not hear that. I did not read that in the comments. So I think that there is a lot of agreement. I think we agree that it's urgent, but when I read the document, I fail to see how some of the pillars, the recommendations that sort of act as pillars to that document are really going to meet that urgency and meet that need in a way that is, going back to my original point, that is good for Oregonians across the state. I think in some ways it resembles a good conversation, many of which I have had, where you sort of talk about what would be awesome to accomplish, but you don't actually talk about how realistic it is and meeting the needs that we have as a state. And I'm not sure where this document gets us there.
Okay, thank you, Tucker. What was the chat?
If you all, when you start to speak, if you could say your name clearly.
Oh, yes.
Affiliation.
Sorry, Tucker Bellman, Director of Government Relations for the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Thank you, sorry.
Thank you. Do you want to replay, Rebecca, who you were for the record?
Sure. For the record, Rebecca Smith, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance Senior Director of Policy and Education.
Okay, so those are the two in reverse order of who just spoke. So others, just again, opening up for others who didn't have the chance to have a space for an interview. Yeah.
Yes, I'll
Jump in.
go. Self-identifying as someone who didn't get it in my schedule. Diane Brandt with Renewable Northwest. And I think that a lot of these themes resonate with me. I agree, especially on some of them that are cross-cutting across the areas, affordability, the reality, reliability, and what that means, all of the different tentacles that that has into our the pillars of the strategy. I also appreciate just what's been said in the room around transparency on strategies and kind of the visibility of what we're thinking. And kind of adding in what Tucker just mentioned in terms of what does it look like? And the actual plan. And I think Rebecca, you mentioned that as well on the tactical strategies here. And I think that would be my one point I would plus up on this is wanting to see a bit more directionality that we can build off of, or, what does it look like to continue to build off of this strategy? Is there something already in place? I know that the energy strategy has the authorization to be renewed or to be looked at again. But if we don't have the details or pieces in place, what is the value of redoing it if we don't have the specificity? And so, the areas where we live, transmission, land use, utility scale, there are a lot of numbers are out there that maybe sometimes don't translate to something that's quantifiable on the trade-off piece, as has been mentioned. And I think that is something that we had hoped would be more directly addressed, acknowledging how difficult it is that trade-off discussion of what is the reality of what this looks like? What does it mean for our land use? And how do we have a conversation with Oregonians in rural areas? In the conversations I've been in, this question or this aspect consistently comes up. And I think Odo is the entity that's well placed to give some information and guidance on how to have that conversation. There's a desire for numbers, and not from the utilities or from developers or from even maybe BPA, but from a third party, more neutral entity like Odo to kind of push forward those needed conversations on that local level. And then that trickles up to those larger conversations, maybe at the state level and the planning entities. Agree with the urgency, agree with reality looking forward, agree that we have a great backbone here in the Northwest with the hydro system. Also want to be realistic of what our changing weather patterns are doing to that backbone that we've been relying on for so many years. And then just maybe question mark, something to have some clarity in the final report is how information and reflections from BPA are integrated into this, considering the large footprint of their transmission system and also their updated analysis on where things are standing and how we're looking ahead on using the hydro system, also from the Northwest Power Council as well. Because I think that only adds to the urgency on different things. Yeah. Single peaking region to a double peaking region, more extreme weather events that last more than a day, 5-day cold snaps. It's a big question on resiliency. And wanting to be sure that we are keeping the lights on and the heat going in underpinning all of our aspirations moving forward. So maybe that's the reality piece as well. So, but huge lift. So appreciations, absolutely. And I appreciate the space to think through this, because as an energy nerd, sometimes I feel like it becomes esoteric. So seeing something on paper that we can comment on and build is really helpful.
Can I ask a,
Yeah.
can I ask a follow-up question? Because I think that there's just a thread here that I think would be helpful, and if anybody else wants to add to it, which is this issue of specificity is coming up, and you've mentioned that it would be helpful to have more numbers. And I think, we did quantification of some things, but there's a lot that we didn't quantify. And I think it would be helpful to understand where we can be most helpful and which numbers, like where specifically. I think that would be, and you don't have to answer it now, but if you have an answer, like a quick one, that would be helpful, but you don't feel pressure. And this is for everybody. Andrea, it looks like you might have a.
Yeah.
Because I just think like I said, that we don't think of the energy strategy as the end, it's really the start. And so to the extent that we weren't able to quantify some things in the energy strategy, there's kind of an ongoing work plan, I think, that for us at Odo to consider on where we can be helpful and where we can provide data and where we can dig in. So
Yeah.
that's my question.
So being specific on specificity.
Yes.
Yeah.
Get you. Yeah. Yeah.
I'm going to give you the broad strategic tactical answer that I see to that. So the way I've come to be wanting to read the strategy is putting myself in the position of the legislature and of Odo, right? So first, let's put myself in the position of as a legislator. What is the information I need? Because remember, a little information can be very dangerous. A lot of information can be very dangerous, like be careful what you ask for, right? So I'm now putting myself in the position of the legislator, I absolutely agree with Tucker's comments about time, but so they're going to sit there, they're going to get this report, and they're going to need to make policy decisions of what are they going to put legislation forward on. So what's the information that they need in order to make smart choices? Right? And that's the timing of the impact of the actions or the timing until the impact of the action. So let's say if you go into the whole authority issue, when is that going to come into play? Right? All right. Well, that's a piece, like where do the puzzle pieces fit? Right? What is the extent of the impact? That was the piece that was really, to me, lacking in the report, is to know, I'm going to choose between action 1 and action 2. Well, how big is the impact of action 1 versus how much it costs versus how big is the impact? So it's not like, here's a specific number, but here's the bubbles. Here's how big the bubbles are, right? If you want to put it that way. And what are the trade-offs, right? What are the trade-offs among the Oregon goals? That's where, I'm a legislator, I've got all these goals. So what are those, when you're looking at the land use trade-offs, or the trade-offs with goals 3, 4, and 5, right? And just kind of like cost range estimates, like, is this a no cost thing? Is it just a policy? Is this just kind of putting things into buckets that they can start making decisions with. And then if I look at it, flip it into, I'm now in Odo's seat, I want them to have that information so they don't make a policy that then limits my ability to get into that specificity. Right, that says you have to do specificity on A, when really, you guys know, it's really path B we need to go down, right? So there's, you want to capture everything and steer, and hope the ship is going in the right direction, so.
Yeah.
Well, I'll just add really quickly, I really appreciate that visualization of like thinking about it as magnitude of costs, and then also thinking about like, what does that get us?
Right.
Like, is it the impact in a positive way towards the goals that we're working towards? So
So the size of the bubble with.
I like the bubble, I like getting the bubble is helping.
If you want to jump in on this, and I'll come to
It's
Fred.
related on the cost issue. As I was reading it, many of the actions were Odo-oriented studies, data collections, things like that. which as an energy supplier, we kept thinking, okay, is this going to raise the energy supplier assessment, particularly in the context of the governor's announcements regarding the general fund just yesterday. So that was a huge thing for me as I was reading it, thinking of the ratepayers, because that goes right to the ratepayers.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. Let's go.
Scott wants to join in on this particular topic.
Scott, jump in, and then Fred will open it to you.
Thank you so much. And just to clarify, was that the last person who spoke from a legislative standpoint, was that Andrea?
Yep, it was Andrea and then Jennifer Jolly.
Okay, yeah. So that was, I think that was really succinct and really excellent in terms of what kinds of elements do you need to make legislative decisions, of what are the trade-off elements, et cetera. Because I think what we're grappling with here is our energy reality and then our aspirational energy future. And I think there is a chasm or a divide between those. And I do think that we would love to share some statistics about what we've seen the energy system do that we currently have. And I think that's going to be a helpful building block going forward. I don't know if I can share my screen, but I have a slide to Andrea's point to really illustrate what we've been seeing in the Northwest, Oregon included. If I can do that, if you guys, is that okay to share my screen really quickly with one?
I have no idea. Try it and see what happens.
See what happens.
Should happen.
Just make sure you're sharing is appropriate.
No, we might have to go to the other room again.
Yeah, no, you know what? I don't know if it's going to work. But let me just tell you from a slide that we've used to help kind of illustrate what we've been seeing across the Pacific Northwest. I think all of us remember, I think we've talked in these conversations over the last number of sessions for this group about peak weather events. And I definitely appreciate what Renewables Northwest folks had to say about reliability, about affordability, about concerns about weather. That weather concern and that impact of extremes and peaks is real. And in those two events, and definitely if you want to qualify these information, we'd be glad to provide, I would say, connections to resources that are in the federal government or state or wherever you want to sort of qualify these. But I'll tell you what happened in the heat dome of 2021. 78.2% of the region was powered by hydro and 11.8% was powered by natural gas. And we actually were able to export at that time about 13.4% of our energy. So we were actually exporting to others during that heat dome. So that tells you when things get really tight, what resources do we depend on? It's right now, when we're in trouble, it's largely hydro and natural gas. And then what's interesting is when we've progressed to MLK, which is 2024, MLK weekend of 2024, this was a cold event. And we had a number of things going on. Interestingly enough, 53.9% hydro, 15.8% natural gas. And here's the scary thing. We were as a region importing 21.2%, meaning we were at an energy deficit. We were not able to support ourselves. There was no wind appreciably during this time. Now, believe me, I'm a big fan of a diverse portfolio in terms of having all kinds of levers to pull. But I just think that we can underpin and really underscore where we need to go by understanding where we are today. And something that we're going to be putting into the energy plan comments is, and I've said this before in these meetings, but I think it really is critically important. We should be looking at a natural gas bridge where if we have an emergency like California, the system they have set up through Governor Newsom's declaratory order in 2021, followed by the assembly actions in 2022, they created strategically placed natural gas units around the state to help fire up and power them through these peak events. So I think we should be thinking about those kinds of avenues for us as we go forward. And something that we've just uncovered that I'm digging deeper into right now is, and this is a scary thing because this plan, we've talked a lot, or I shouldn't say this plan, the strategy, we've talked a lot about making sure we don't leave people behind. Something that we are seeing that at an alarming rate across not only the country, but here in the Pacific Northwest, is a heavy uptick in home generator purchases by individual homeowners. And the number one segment in that demographic is suburban homeowners of large single family homes with higher median incomes. And they are relying heavily on either natural gas or gasoline for these generator units. So we're going to be putting that into our comments. The reason I'm really worried about this is if we don't get a strategy that helps the masses, we're going to see a continued class divide between people who have the means to buy a generator, which will also be putting out an emissions trace that's not as efficient as a centralized plant. So those are the kinds of things that I just want us to be thinking about. I'm sorry, because I went a little bit longer than I expected there, but I did want to make sure we knew about what powered us through those 2021 and 2024 extreme events as we look forward. And we'd be glad to provide more stats. Andrea, thank you for bringing that to the table in terms of how do we sharpen our pencils and go forward with the right strategies. Thank you.
Doc, can I ask a random question for my
Sure.
own curiosity? Like, because the distinction between kind of the heat event and the cool event, would that change over time as, I think the way to think about right to cool, as folks have more and more air conditioning.
Right.
Like, does that start then shifting the numbers that you just described?
That's an interesting question because we are, I think somebody else just mentioned this earlier, I think Renewable Northwest did, we are starting to see a dual peaking need here in the Pacific Northwest, and the strategies will be different because there is more natural gas supply in the summertime. There's less natural gas supply in the wintertime because you have competing home energy needs where the gas is flowing to the homes to fire a furnace. So there is a competing need. There's a need for making sure we understand that. But I guess the question was, will we see over time a shift? You're saying away from those resources, or what?
No, just I mean, the numbers you shared, as more and more people are getting online with air conditioning, will we see just more demand, I guess?
Oh, yeah. Most new home construction, Portland General Electric has reported that, and I don't know if they're in the room or online today, but I think they have stats on the number of builds in their territory over the years that have really added air conditioning that didn't previously have that. That's a really giant new load development, and that's why we're starting to see this double peaking element of a heavier winter peak a heavier summer peak, combined with that winter traditional element. I kind of think personally, I mean, we've been big hydro boosters, but I kind of think that hydro has kind of been, follow me through on this, sort of like the helicopter parent whose kid lives in the basement and they're not leaving the house because the parent takes care of everything for them. Hydro has helped us take care of kind of everything in this region and has masked our need to go out and diversify. Sorry, is anybody following that, or is that not making sense?
We're following, yeah, that's gonna be a new image.
But the idea here is that hydro has been so great for us and so elastic until, oh my gosh, it's not. And now we're, I think, playing more catch up versus other regions that have had to diversify over time because they didn't have the luxury of hydro. So I think that's just something we've got to also get our heads around going forward too. Sorry, I've taken up way too much time. Thank you, everybody.
I want to appropriately glance. I don't want to cut off Fred either. So.
Yeah, Fred, will you jump in and then Tucker will circle back to you?
Yeah, I actually have some general kind of directional comments on the draft strategy, but maybe I'll hold off on that and just, this has been an interesting conversation, so I don't want to interrupt it, but just add one or two more pieces. The thing about hydro is the June 21 heat dome occurred near the peak of the hydro output in the Northwest, the spring runoff. The January 24 freeze occurred during a low period for hydro, which was even lower than normal, about 3,000 megawatts below average for the Northwest as a whole, including British Columbia, which is important because there's a lot up there. And that's probably the major reason why we had so much imports. The other thing to say about that is the imports were available and the energy imbalance market was a major factor in bringing that to us in an efficient way, from the rest of the West, which didn't have the super deep cold that we have. And one side note on the issue about wind cessation, yes, that happens during these cold periods. But, with the big cold air masses coming down from the Arctic that bring that kind of weather, you get a wind surge right before that cessation. And I've looked at lots of episodes like this across the country over the last 10 years. It's a very consistent pattern, as you would expect. And so one of the things that our hydro system does is enable us to capture that kind of wind surge by generating a little less hydro when the wind is way up right before the really cold weather hits, and then ride us through. And we can also look at other kinds of storage and demand response to help us as well. So just to say, I think our real strategy going forward is that a diverse resource mix, as diverse as we can get, including supply, storage, and customer side resources, is really kind of the underpinning, and I see a lot of that in the strategy overall. So I'll hold off on the bigger picture comments until maybe later on.
Thanks, Fred. Tucker?
Yeah, thanks. Again, this is Tucker Bellman with the Oregon Rural Electric Cooperative Association. I wanted to double down on some things Scott said, and I want to clarify one thing too. I think he said this well. A diverse portfolio is always something that you're going to hear from electric utilities that we believe in. We don't really care where the electrons come from. We just want more of them, right? We're always trying to find more power. We're fine with wherever they come from. But I do, one of my biggest concerns has been both reading through the strategy and in recent weeks, sort of the announcements on restarting litigation on the Federal Columbia River Power System, is that I feel like as a state, we're really narrowing the sideboards that we have on what we find to be acceptable electricity generation in this state. We know the situation with nuclear, the lawsuit could greatly impact the availability of hydroelectricity in the state. We obviously have already phased out coal-fired power plants, and it feels more and more all the time like we're sort of narrowing the scope to it has to be solar, wind, or battery powered, or it's not going to work for us. And I think for one, that's not the most realistic approach to sort of realizing the challenges ahead of us when it comes to demand and supply constraints. The second piece of this, and I keep going back to this, and I know it's maybe more of an issue for me than others, but I'm from the rural parts of the state. I've lived in four rural counties in Oregon before moving over for this. And one thing that I know we benefit from is if you drive an electric vehicle into a electric co-op service territory and you charge that vehicle, you are already driving now on completely clean electricity and much more affordable electricity than you're going to find in some other parts of the state. If you are utilizing energy efficient technologies in those same service territories, once again, you're backed up by or you're utilizing clean energy. And so when we in the rural parts of the state look at this process, we're like, hey, don't try to come fix us because we're already sort of there, right? We're already sort of achieving those goals. And it feels like in some ways steps from the current steps from the state, and frankly, the lack of acknowledgement in the energy strategy of just the critical importance of hydro makes it sort of feel like we are in those service territories, which is much of rural Oregon, being lumped in with, these are the problem children that need fixing. And I think we're sort of already there. And so I don't know, I don't necessarily have the best recommendation for how to fix it other than to maybe acknowledge that much of the state is already sort of getting us there. And I think Scott's analogy is great. It's like hydro has sort of carried a lot of that water, no pun intended, for so much of the state already getting to where the state wants to be. And I think that really needs to be a focus of this. And I think we need to start with that and say, because we have that, we are able to look at these other opportunities. And frankly, we can look at other parts of the state where maybe solar, wind, and battery storage is actually more feasible or more useful for them. I think we also, the last thing I'll acknowledge is, or the point I'll make is acknowledging that some of the infrastructure in rural areas is now going to become the problem. So we have the clean electricity, but I can drive, and I do this frequently, I can drive 70 miles in Eastern Oregon and never come within range of an EV charger. So it's like, it's not so much about what sort of power are you charging your vehicle with, it's can you actually charge that vehicle? And so I think in some ways it's like shift that conversation and say for rural Oregon, they've got the power supply they need. We just have to help them actually maximize that.
Let's go Jeff, then Shannon, then Rebecca. Jeff, we can't hear you for some reason.
I'm unmuting just a minute here.
That's one of the best ways. We can hear you. Oh, no. Are you back on mute?
Okay, I'm trying to unmute.
No, we got you. We can hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yep, we got you.
Hooray, thank you. I was trying my best. Okay, so, well, first of all, this has been a fascinating discussion. I love these. I'm so proud of everybody for digging in a very conscientious and valuable way. Now, I have to bring up something that is a little uncomfortable and not particularly fun, but I think, as a political scientist and as someone who used to work many years ago with the U.S. Senate Energy Committee, I really think I need to bring it up. And that is, I think it's important to recognize and address the 900-pound elephant in the room. And this is the Trump administration's effort to thwart what it refers to as state overreach when states pursue their clean energy and climate goals that are central to this energy strategy. So the current draft includes the following sentence as cross-cutting action number 8. It says, we should advocate for federal policies that support the advancement of state energy objectives. And that's true. But I believe it's critically important for Oregon state government, our congressional delegation, and really all stakeholders who care about our energy goals to do much more than simply advocate for sound energy policies. We need to vigorously, in my opinion, we need to vigorously defend against efforts by the current administration to make it exceedingly difficult for Oregon to move in a practical direction on these goals. Now, of course, Oregon does not have the authority or capacity to take on all these critical recommendations that qualified staff at the federal agencies used to do, but no longer are being allowed to do. However, there may be some particularly important instances where the state may determine that it must at least attempt to assume some critical responsibilities that were previously addressed in a conscientious manner by federal agency staff. And I think this is particularly important when the current leaders of these agencies choose to ignore or misinterpret federal laws and regulations in ways that are likely to jeopardize the health and safety of Oregon citizens, threaten the environment, and harm our quality of life. And when, number 2, when the state either already has the available staff and expertise to assume these responsibilities, or has decided that the risk of inaction is sufficiently high to justify securing these resources on a temporary basis. I don't think the current administration is going to last forever. I hope not, at least, but we have a crisis situation right now. The analogy I have, so I may have mentioned in a previous meeting that my younger brother is the #1 non-Trumper in the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid. He's retiring at the end of this month. He was DOGE went over his head and fired about 450 of his staff people. Anybody who was working with Native Americans health services, minority health services, women, breast cancer, anything like that, those boxes were just X'd out, and those people were all to get fired. And of course, we have the Centers for Disease Control now taking on vaccinations issues. Now, here's an example where the state of Oregon, the state of Washington, and the state of California have at least decided to take on the vaccination issues, role and responsibilities on its own. There may be instances where Oregon Department of Energy, maybe in collaboration with California and Washington State, will want to take on some of the responsibilities that are critical to our health and safety that are not being addressed now at the federal level. And I'll have some examples in our formal comments, but I just wanted to raise that because I think it's I guess I felt that if I didn't raise it, I would feel ashamed that I didn't at least bring it up. And Janine Benner mentioned at the very beginning that these are very, very difficult times, very controversial times. And I'm so proud of what's in this energy strategy. We've all done a really good job, but I just don't think we could ignore that 900-pound gorilla and just pretend all we have to do is advocate for the federal government to do the right thing. We need to do more than that.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. For folks that aren't in person, there were box of donuts going around, so,
Doing my part.
so, you're missing out. Shannon, floor is yours.
All right, someone grab a maple bar on my behalf, please. I'm a sucker for those. I want it, the Shannon Souza, Soul Coast Consulting and Design. I've been sitting watching the power planning staff work on both of our generating resources, how the various systems interact and our fuel supply. And I wanted to double down on the comments that Scott made about our needs and the urgency of those needs and the opportunity for us in advising legislators and helping to give them some real concrete direction. We need to be flexible as to the extent possible about those resources. It doesn't mean that we need to throw away our clean energy aspirations, there are some very responsible stepping stones that we can take. We have existing natural gas infrastructure. Frankly, we need more, and we're going to continue to hear about that from many voices going forward. I think it would be counterproductive to suggest to our legislators that we don't. These are immediate steps. A couple of other resources that I observe that we are presently in this region and specifically in this state actually exporting to other countries to use as renewable resources that we're really undervaluing, and I think kind of inhibiting particularly our rural communities is in biomass. I know that we talked a little bit about this. It is included, just kind of to the side, but we're in a breadbasket. We have a ton of agriculture occurring. There's another delegation going to Denmark next week. I'm going to hop on that plane with them, looking at the great work that's been done around industrial symbiosis with a very strong theme to agriculture. And we are a huge ag state. The other side is our timber. A lot of talk in the biomass utilization working group. Yale Forestry has been doing some excellent work, Sustainable Northwest. We have a lot of forestry byproducts down in Coos Bay. We've got this new pellet storage. We're going to export literally hundreds of tons of our pellets. These are shavings and sawdust from our forest manufacturing facilities, but we're exporting them to Asia so they can turn them into renewable energy. We have some real opportunities for genuine, readily available, let's get this party started and keep the lights on, renewable energy and stepping stone long-term resources like natural gas that we can decarbonize over time, but we can lean on in relatively short order to help support both our rural communities and our regional resource adequacy. So I really appreciate this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Shannon. Rebecca?
Thank you. Rebecca Smith, again, from Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. And I just want to rectify that I did not start out my initial comments acknowledging all the work that you guys have done. Yes, please know that every comment I make is grounded in that. I wanted to absolutely agree with the comments from Andrea and others about kind of that real importance about how we see this plan being used and making sure that it is in fact actionable in that way. I won't belabor that. I do also want to, agree with and build on what we've heard from, Tucker and Scott and others about, really looking at that portfolio approach. I think that some of the plan may veer dangerously close to potentially picking winners and losers. And I also, we already have a model for what it looks like to build a portfolio that can take advantage of generation that may not meet all of our hopes and dreams for what a renewable decarbonization pathway might look like, but may in fact have very low or zero carbon intensity. You've seen a lot of states that have renewable portfolio standards where instead of upping that standard from 60% to 80% or to 100, they said, you know what, we're going to keep our renewable energy goal of 50, 60, what have you %. And then we're going to cap it off with the remainder of getting 100% is going to be quote unquote clean. It's going to be zero carbon, where, it may not meet our definition of what is a renewable feedstock, but it is absolutely going to help us meet that goal of reducing emissions and right away. And that also, I think, can include some of those feedstocks that Shannon mentioned that may or may not fit within our, renewable definitions, but could definitely fit in with clean, depending on what we do with them. I absolutely want to, touch on biomass again. I understand that it can be costly to get it out of where it is sometimes, but there are methods of getting it out, and especially where it's currently being open burned, having a much lower carbon intensity with the use of it. And I did, I had one more point that has since left my brain.
We can come back to it.
I'll end it there. Thank you.
Is it safe to assume that anyone can comment now, or we
Oh,
still?
yes, we are opened up. So I think we were naturally moving through. Rebecca, finish your thought, then we'll go to Chris Golightly.
Actually, first is Jen B's, then Chris Golightly. Jen asked in the
Okay,
chat.
but first
Oh,
Rebecca.
Okay.
Yes,
First,
but
Rebecca.
first, finish your thought.
And just my last comment or question, but fitting with that, with, you know, looking at, you know, quote unquote clean is the plan, the strategy.
Thank you.
You're comfortable.
References in a number of places, clean electricity. And I wasn't sure if and where that is actually a term defined in statute or rule. I know HB 2021 references non-emitting electricity, but not clean. And so if it's not defined somewhere, I think that would be a great recommendation. You know, certainly RHA, we're interested in trying to get a definition for clean hydrogen on the books. That is what the federal government has right now. That was in the IRA, that may or may not continue to live on in federal statute. And so we would love to have it ensconced here in terms of being a very strict carbon intensity ceiling. Thank you. That was all.
So is there I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, is there a definition in rule or statute for clean electricity?
There's not one shared definition that I know of. I'm looking to Jody to see if she says, no, you're wrong. Okay.
Okay, so I think it was Jen B's, then Chris Golightly, then Fred.
Okay, great. Jen B's, Port of Portland. And just before making comments, you know, just really also respect the process, appreciate everybody's participation, and understand and acknowledge the complexities of what we're talking about today. I think for the Port of Portland specifically, you know, we're just involved in the movement of goods and cargo and passengers, and thinking about decarbonizing transportation, aviation in particular is pretty tough. So we really look at renewable fuels as really the only viable opportunity to decarbonize aviation. And as some comments have already flagged here, right, we're looking at some production of renewable fuels like sustainable aviation fuel maybe being produced here, but used out of state or globally. And so I think we're just, you know, really supportive of opportunities here for this near term, as quick as we can, kind of drop in, use existing infrastructure, and let's decarbonize what we can on the transportation front. Those are things that just are really important to the work that we specifically do, which I know is just one part of a very, very large, complicated landscape. So just wanted to put a plug in for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jen. Chris Golightly?
Sure. Hi, Chris Golightly with the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. And just start off with, again, appreciation for everything that's been put together and the development of this strategy. It's really complex and overwhelming, and I am not an energy expert by any means, and not my first job. And so I'm trying to follow along, keep up, and just have been able to review the draft in the last couple days. And was not able to give feedback. So I would like to just repeat, listening to all the feedback that was provided, the summary, I think it really hits. I'm like, why did I even write comments? Because it's like everything that we wanted to say from a fisheries point of view. We agree with the reliability and the resilience focus pieces, that those really need to be focused on in the strategy, and from a tribal point of view on the funding and the land use points that were made. I can't help but hear a lot of discussion here about hydropower, and do note in my comments, we noted going through that it's notably absent from discussion in the strategy. That just, not really addressed directly, how it really fits in, other than like coordinating with BPA and moving forward, which is of course going to be needed. But the other piece that's absent is a recognition that Oregon is a partner to the Columbia River Basin Initiative, which is a salmon restoration initiative focusing not only on salmon but on energy. And there's just that space doesn't seem to be made in the strategy to hold that position as we're moving forward with energy. It seems to be a little bit disjointed between agencies and the governor's office on those pieces. And I'd like to see at least some recognition included in the strategy. For fish, did a search, the word fish, salmon is not even included in the strategy. So that's where my expertise comes from. That's my point of view. I believe that's why it was added, and I couldn't let this conversation go by without bringing that up. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Chris. Yeah, jump in.
I just want to make a point on that. That appeared to me, that it was noticeably absent. I think there was a passing reference that 1/3 is hydro of the energy generation in the state. But along those lines, I think it's important to highlight in the next draft that hydro was incorporated, the existing hydro system, into the model. So that, all the assumptions around that should be highlighted, I think, to the policymakers, that there is no consideration of, for example, taking out or breaching the lower Snake River dams, and then that should be made apparent.
I think to double down on that briefly, I do think it would be helpful for policymakers to sort of understand that power mix the way it sits today, and then sort of superimpose that with what some of the forecasted demand increases are, so that they, one, understand exactly what our power mix looks like now, and then how much more on top of that will be needed over 10 years. So as they're making decisions, they sort of have that accurate picture in there. So I think to just for Jennifer's point there, I think that's something that could have been improved upon in the document.
Yeah, I just want to add one thing to this, which won't respond to everything that I'm hearing, but to part of it, which is that images were notably absent from the draft. So one of the things that we're working on, we would have needed another several weeks to do all the formatting, so we left that out. But one of the things that I'm taking note of here is where an image would be helpful that brings back in that picture, so that decision makers have that picture of what is the resource stack today, and what does the resource stack look like down the road, or might it look like down the road, and what role do all these resources play relative to each other. So that's coming, and I just want to say that, because I realize that was just the words alone it's difficult to convey some of this through words alone. Rebecca can't wait to say something on what I just said. Okay, go for it.
It actually wasn't referencing that, but I'm excited for pictures. I was told there would be no math. I really appreciate Chris's comments, and just wanted to try to give another plug for trying to get as specific as possible on that trade-off discussion, because that is an absolute another big one, especially for us here in Oregon, and how dependent we are on the hydro system, but also with all of our sovereign tribal nations, with how we think about or don't ecosystem services and first foods. And so, trying to add that to the discussion of, if we are considering, changing the operation of the hydro system in any way, understand that will put a hole in our generation, and so that we can kind of look at that and say, look, all of these things are important to us. So how do we balance that? And if we say that, making sure that we're able to maintain some of our ecosystems and our biota are really important, being understanding, be like, yes, and we understand that this is what it means, and we're willing to address that head on.
Yeah, thank you for that. Could we go, Fred and then Brian?
Thanks. A couple minutes just to cover general impressions and a couple of specific ideas. I'll preface this by saying that Northwest Energy Coalition is participating with quite a few other groups, including some on the call here for general, for a lot of detailed comments. I won't be diving deeply into the report to talk about that. This is more of an overview. The first thing is I've been focusing on the action recommendations. 42 items, that's a lot. I don't think that's an unmanageable number or too much or whatever, but it's a lot. And I looked through them and categorized them in kind of in, what they're basically intended to do. And anybody can do this and come up with your own ranking. But in the 42 items, I found 7 new programs where the state agency would create a new program, 5 expanded programs where extending the funding or reach of an existing program, 1 new policy that would have to be enacted by the legislature, 2 regulations that would have to be adopted, 2 standards that would be new or expanded, 14 studies, 5 activities where an agency is already doing things, but this would extend the existing efforts, and finally 5 kind of general guidance points in those 42 items. That's a lot. So I think, and really, I did not have any major problems with any of them. I think it's going to be, and I think you'll get a fair number of recommendations, including from our broad group, about how to prioritize those. That will be really important going to talk to the legislature about what this strategy is intending to do and what their role and the role of the state of Oregon broadly, and including ODO, will be going forward. I think, though, that given the breadth of these recommendations, that some kind of process is needed going forward to kind of steer that, whether it's under the Energy Advisory Work Group or some other kind of new steering group that might, for example, consist of agencies, legislators, and the stakeholders, meaning all the rest of us, with some authority to get information from the relevant state agencies and provide review and guidance. Because the point is, we don't want this strategy just to sit on the shelf. Somebody has to kind of make sure it's moving forward. I think that would be my first thought or recommendation. The second is, I think there's going to be there's a really significant need for a focused effort to look at broad funding for all the work that's included under the strategy. There are lots of new program concepts, including the the state loan revolving fund. By the way, on that, I don't think that's by itself. I think that's a really good starting point. But there are lots of funding channels that we should be looking at. And one of the questions is, of course, where does the funding come for things like this, a large state revolving loan fund? Well, I think we need to look at some concepts and some possibilities there. So some kind of process that will continue the work on building the funding support base for the strategy and identify some specific things that go beyond where we are now, because we clearly do not have the resources yet in place to implement all the pieces of the strategy. A third item that I'm thinking about is a group to develop a kind of a cross customer energy resource sub-strategy, a more coherent way to pull all those pieces together. So energy efficiency, demand response, storage, electric vehicles, community solar and storage, microgrids, resilience resources. That's a big bundle of things that's beginning to look like a really major kind of aggregate resource. It involves end users, all of us as Oregonians. What are our, what do Oregonians want to do to contribute to our energy system, and how can that be coordinated with our utilities and agencies? That, I think that effort is something that we probably need some kind of coordinated effort to do that going forward. I also think kind of a fourth point, I have just 2 more. One is, I think there's a need to focus a bit more on what contribution that public power can play. This includes municipal utilities, PUDs, co-ops, and we have 1 tribal utility. The public power kind of part of the electric system in the state on the demand side has gone from about 28% 15 years ago to about 38% now. It's a lot larger than people realize. A lot of that is because of data centers. But in addition to that, I think that we have a big opportunity to support public power becoming a more active participant and developer of resources, whether it's supply, storage, customer side resources. And in addition, public power represents the areas where we want to see a lot of new resource development, whether it's transmission or generating resources or you name it. I think this was mentioned before, I think we need more of an all-in approach, all of Oregon, all 36 counties, all of our utilities, public power, investor owned, to get to really coordinate on how we develop Oregonian energy for Oregonians. It's not just that we certainly are part of a larger electric grid, natural gas system, but we have a lot of opportunity in the state. And finally, I'm just going to mention one resource area that doesn't get any attention yet, but I think will get a lot, and that is geothermal. We have the big effort Mazama is doing at the down at Newberry Crater, but we also have a new extended or engineered or whatever EGS engineered geothermal systems, which basically take techniques out of fracking and then apply that to geothermal without the bad chemicals. This is going to be a very big deal, and the new maps of geothermal potential that I've been seeing, particularly from Stanford University, suggest that geothermal potential in Oregon is probably the best in the country in broad terms of where it can be developed across our state, including on the west side, which is very important because if we see west side geothermal, that would help sidestep some of the transmission constraints we have. So those are my broad overview points, and hope that helps.
Great, thanks, Fred. So Tucker, I know you wanted to jump in, and then I want to come to a question in the chat. Brian, you had your card up.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So kind of two comments that I have is in generally around messaging and modeling over the strategy. So the first, and I'm at risk because I don't think it's going to be a popular view with the advisory group, but even if we were to successfully decarbonize 100% in the state of Oregon, the reality is that it's 0.16% of the global carbon. And so part of the concern that I have is if we're talking about climate change as one of the main drivers to decarbonize everything, what impact are we really going to have? Considering that Oregon isn't a micro dome, that if we change this, it's going to impact us. Really, the impact of climate change is a global aspect. And if you take into consideration the cost to implement a lot of the ideas in the strategy, what impact is it really going to have for Oregonians? And the second, and this is always a challenge with modeling, is real world examples versus what we're modeling. And I think one of the challenges in presenting this model to the general public and putting some of these initiatives in place is the cost of electricity for the average homeowner has increased 50% since 2020. And so in the modeling, we're talking about reducing costs for the homeowners. And so where is that answer between what citizens have actually realized in the past 5 years versus what we're modeling in, lack of a better term, a spreadsheet? And what is that gap? What is that bridge between what we've experienced over the prior 5 years versus what we're putting in the modeling to make that a reality?
Right, thank you. So Tucker, I think you were going to jump in on the last topic.
Yeah, I think Fred had said some things really, really well, but I think Brian did too. And it's actually kind of playing off what Brian said, kind of playing off of some of the things Fred said. And Jennifer mentioned the energy supplier assessment and various programs that came out of this, recommendations that came out of this, and the modeling that Brian's referencing is around sort of the energy efficiency opportunities that still exist, right? Energy efficiency technologies, deploying those, making those more accessible, and various programs around that, various programs around microgrids, demand response, that sort of thing. And I guess I would caution Odo and all of us really, when we're looking at those technologies and those opportunities, as Brian said, there is a customer side cost to those, whether it's purchasing the technologies themselves and installing them, or even just any program that increases the energy supplier assessment essentially increases rates on customers. And so one of the benefits we often talk about, Brian alluded to this, is that there is cost savings available if you get a high efficiency water heater or electric appliance in your house, and there are cost savings, but those get diluted every time we increase energy supplier assessment, and those obviously those savings essentially have to finance the actual upfront cost of the technology that you're deploying. And so I would just be hopeful that in the modeling, every cost that is also associated with that technology is being included, because it may be such that we're raising the energy supplier assessment so high with all of these different programs that it sort of is a wash, or that we're not really realizing that benefit to its greatest extent. And so I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense in that, but I think it's just important to know that the ESA, it costs ratepayers, and it can cost them greatly if we continue to increase it. And we may lose a lot of the benefits we see in some of these other sort of options or ideas that are coming from the strategy if we increase that too much.
Thanks, Tucker. So Jessica, were you going to hit on a question that was in the chat?
Shannon had a question about the model, and she indicated, and Joni, I'm looking to you for some input here, that McNary Dam is being upgraded basically, and they will be increasing their generation from Chelan and McNary. So she wanted to know if these were resources that were included in the modeling, and I have no idea, so I'm asking if you know for sure.
I might need to double check. I can answer the higher level though, which is that the modeling accounted for upgrades to turbines and essentially the efficiencies that you would get from that. So you actually see a little bit more hydro availability over time due to that. And so to the extent that this is an example of that, then it is captured by the model, but the model didn't look dam by dam. So it's unlikely to have incorporated those specific projects, but it did make an assumption based on data from the council and BPA, I think. So hopefully that is enough of an answer.
I see a yellow thumbs up floating in the air.
And
Jennifer Hillhart, did you want to jump in? Maybe?
I'll jump in what Jennifer flagged in the chat. She just wanted to confirm if we have moved into the key issues discussion now. My response was, I think we've organically sort of evolved to that anyway. But I kind of wanted to do a check and see if we want to open the floor up.
Yes, we organically moved from starting with folks that didn't get to interview if they were raising either additional issues or issues that came up for them. And then we've kind of just morphed into a wonderful conversation. So I'll take some ownership, Jennifer, as a facilitator, that we didn't delineate each of those steps. But yes, we've kind of opened up a broader conversation. So for Jennifer, Tess, Corey, are those the folks we haven't heard from? If there's anything that you wanted to specifically bring in or reflect back on?
This is Jennifer from Cub. I just threw some thoughts in the chat, just to put them out there.
Perfect, thank you. So if we can showcase the chat, we'll let folks in the room read that. And then what I might do is ask us to take a break. So those are some comments in the chat. So we'll work through your chat while we're on the break. So if we could take 10 minutes, and then I'll see if there's just any last thoughts in this section, and then we'll kind of work towards some next steps, some closing, some gratitude, and kind of use our last 35 minutes or so for that purpose. Okay. And Charity, we're reading your chat. Yep. Okay, we'll hold that. I don't know if you want to add anything verbally. although it says pretty clearly what you're thinking, so. Okay. It's 11:14. Let's take 10 minutes. Come back at 11:24 and then work towards our wrapping up. Thanks all. Let's welcome folks back. I'm just catching up with chats. So I'll now thanks Charity for offering the critique. Certainly, we did kind of morph into an unstructured conversation, so I'll acknowledge that might not have been easy or clear for everyone. So thanks for that, and for folks that reflected other opinions about their appreciation of the discussion we just had. So I'll just say thank you for contributing in the ways that that folks did. So I think we wanted to, I don't know if we formally said this, but maybe starting with just like any reflection that you want to offer based on what you've just heard, and not asking for kind of a point by point kind of retort, but just any higher level kind of things that you're taking away. And then I wanted to move into a place and just offer, I won't ask everyone to say something. Yeah, so I'll just ask for you to come into the conversation as you'd like to kind of close kind of our process conversation with a space of gratitude and appreciation. I think we spent a lot of time just now, and I'm certain in the public comments, folks will be able to have the opportunity to offer critiques and asks and missing pieces and pushing and all the things that your commentary will best represent, and some reflection of what folks have already shared, but creating some space for gratitude and appreciation. And then we'll talk about next steps and kind of how we're going to move forward from here. But I wanted to just create a little bit of space for you to reflect back on the conversation, and then we'll move into kind of a round robin, invited round robin if folks want to take up the space.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. And I don't think I'm capable of recapping because there has been so much that that's not what I'm gonna do, but I will share a few reflections that I hope are helpful in the context of this discussion, in the context of comments, and also thinking about like what the next steps are gonna be, and any guidance y'all want to offer to Odo on what would be helpful as next steps. Since the energy strategy, it just won't do everything, right? How do we take it forward? What is the most constructive way to take it forward? So I think, one of the things that we frankly have struggled with, because it's a statewide energy strategy and there are so many differences in our state between, everything from the, urban areas to rural to frontier, the role of households and differences between those households, including in, what they heat with, whether they need air conditioning, are they in a cold climate zone, differences among businesses and industry. There are a lot of differences that we weren't able to get into, that we tried to recognize, but that there's understandably, I can hear, how do we make sure that this really is addressing all Oregonians and benefiting everyone? And I think that, to the extent that there are any specific ideas, I think specific comments at this point would be really helpful. So if, for example, you think, well, I don't see farmers in the county that I live in represented here. Where do they see, I'm not sure how they would see themselves in this energy strategy. If you have a suggestion on how to better incorporate a perspective into the energy strategy, or how to make sure that we incorporate views in the next steps, those are very welcome. And we're very aware of the diversity that makes us such a strong state in so many ways. And the challenge of carrying forward these discussions in a way that's meaningful and that brings in different voices. So I just wanted to make sure that I made that point. As I said, we'll have pictures. So if there's anything that's not clear, but that you've seen all of the work and the, probably hundreds of images that we've shared with you all. But if there's anything that really you think is particularly helpful, I think that's something that's helpful to hear. I think that this point on, I'm going to get a little bit existential for a minute from an energy strategy perspective. The bill asks us to revisit the energy strategy over time. And there was a comment on, well, is it worth revisiting the energy strategy over time? It depends a little bit on what it's going to be and what it gives us. And I might add to this the challenge for you all on how can we make sure that the process that follows the energy strategy is meaningful, because in my mind, it's not, let's do a report, it informs some thinking, put it on a shelf, 4 years later, we return, do another report. It's really, the report is a starting point, and then we take action, and we find the people to help make things happen. We make the dialogue more robust, build on what we have, we create more data, we generate more data, we figure out where there are gaps, we figure out where there's room for improvement. And then in revisiting, we check in on how it's going. And we say, all right, where do we need to course correct? What's not working? What is working? What do we need to lean into? Also, in 4 years, we might be in a different fiscal situation, right? So I think all of these things are in our minds. And I think that understanding also transparency has come up, kind of what the desire would be in terms of how that's taken forward, and to what extent there is a centralized kind of place to talk about deploying the actions versus, there's some actions that Odo's not going to take on, right? It might be another agency, might be the legislature. We're happy to inform it, but so to some extent, at some point we have to let it go. But to what extent is having something centralized to help guide that process helpful, and what might that look like? These are questions that we're asking ourselves now. And I also feel like I was trying to come up with a metaphor, and I'm going to give the first half and then botch the second half because I didn't come up with a good second half. But I feel like we have these tracks that we've laid out as a state before we started the energy strategy, right? And then we get on the train, and the energy strategy is like, all right, let's figure out how to get this train running. And then it's like, here's where I fall short. I don't know, like a deer got on the tracks or something, and suddenly we're having to make repairs, or maybe we had to change the fuel in that's fueling the engine. And we're just in a really difficult time in kind of achieving our energy policy objectives. I'm not just talking about our clean energy goals, but we on Monday there was an event that Oreca was hosting, and there was reference to we haven't seen this kind of load growth since the end of World War II. It's not that we've never seen it before, but the mindset then was very different than the mindset now. The mindset then was like, we can do it, new technologies, all this great stuff. And now I feel like the mindset is much more fatalistic. So I just feel like it's really difficult. And what we've tried to do in the energy strategy is to have a focus. It's also what the legislature asked us to do on problem solving. And it's really easy to think about why we can't. It's hard to think about how, but I think that that's the value of continuing to have this discussion and checking in over time. So anyway, those are some broad reflections. I also just want to say, I really appreciate the conversation today. I think that one of the challenges throughout this process, I suspect that different people around the room and online have been frustrated at different points in this process. We've tried very hard to make these meetings meaningful. I think we might do a little check-in to see how we can improve over time, but really appreciate today folks chiming in and sharing, and having some of the putting some of the difficult pieces in the middle of the room so we can talk about them. So just really appreciate that. And sorry, I don't have more for you, but that's I think we will digest the notes from today's meeting as we always do. We have great note takers, and we look forward to also reading through written comments, and hopefully this meeting and a little bit of my points here are helpful in finalizing those for those who are submitting comments.
I guess maybe just one housekeeping question on that. I know that public comments are due by the 22nd, if I have that date correctly. When are those going to be made public at least for the group of? Oh, so everybody can see each other's comments? That might be a huge question.
Are you asking for the meeting?
All the comments.
To see each other's.
So to actually be.
Yeah.
Yeah, the comments that have been submitted regarding the strategy, well, I guess the first question, is that going to be made available?
It will be, yes.
And is there an estimated timeframe on when that's, because I know the 29th is a big meeting, right, with EWAG and ODO to go over a lot of this information. Is the feedback and public comments going to be available before that meeting?
Yeah, if you'd like it available before the 29th, I think we could have it ready by that Friday, the 26th.
Okay, I'll be like one of those merged PDF files.
Okay, excellent, thank you.
I'll
You're not
hedge,
creating new material, you're
Yeah.
just,
I'll hedge that bet with maybe Monday. But we'll work, if we run into like, we need reviews or things like that internally, then a weekend helps us because we'll do the work over the weekend. So, thanks.
Great, thank you.
So on that point, at the beginning of this process, there was kind of things laid out about how things would work and the kind of like the contrary comments and how the minority viewpoints might come to be known and
Yeah.
Can you speak to that? Are you going to have like direct links to, okay, the propane guys said this and the co-op said this and you know what I mean?
Which phone number?
Well, not necessarily, but you know,
LinkedIn profile.
I think it would be helpful for the legislature.
Yeah. So there are a few ways that we're addressing this. One is we very much heard and have had in mind not wanting to bury where there are difficulties that are raised or disagreements. So one of the places where we've really tried to do that, and if you see something that's not reflected there but you think should go there, this is something that would also be useful for public comment. We added kind of risks and challenges for each of the policies to try to recognize some of the difficulties, some of what we heard, because often what we hear is not we don't like this. It's often, here's why it's hard for our constituency or from our perspective. So we've tried to address that in the body of the text in the risks and challenges. Some of the recommendations have been adjusted as well to either to broaden and provide more flexibility or to slightly course correct to accommodate some of what we've been hearing and incorporate it. We also will have, Hugh will be working on a document that is going to follow the structure of the final report and that will summarize the comments that we received, but we're going to highlight the comments where there was a really strong contradictory view to what went into the energy strategy, and it'll be highlighted, so it'll be very, very clear. So those are the three ways I would say. I don't know, Hugh, if you want to add to that, because you're.
There will be footnotes that provide like name citations to specific meetings or submitted written comments.
It would be
Yeah.
great just to have, at least for the final comments that are submitted, direct links that I can pull up. What did the Conservation District Association say? And I can read directly without, it packaged or whatever.
As accessible as possible to those
Yeah.
speakers, right? So.
So that's what what I didn't say is we'll also have a compilation of all the comments.
Okay,
And we have meeting notes as well that are organized by meeting. So,
because I did look at
Yeah.
the hydro comments in the summary and that was our number one comment and our position was not reflected. It was just citations to tribal perspective.
in which we can follow up with you on this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I guess I just want to make sure that the unvarnished comments of every person on the final
Yeah.
get public.
Part of it is for their information, but part of that is also to our own credibility, so that when we go before the legislature and say our piece about this, the one thing I would hate to have happen is a legislator say, well, you're not on the record with that. It's like,
Yeah.
we are,
So the-
certainly submitting
and
comments.
it's all the comments, like with the logo submitted
Yeah.
comments are just published, right? Just as is
Yeah.
without any, change from Odo. I think what I'm hearing is kind of dual fold. One, it has to be kind of all the package, but to the extent that there's a way to be able to go directly to specific interest-based parties, I'll just put that as a challenge for Odo, like to try to figure out how can you make it easy for folks to say, I'm really interested in what this comment.
With the report, like as an appendix or however you want to do it, but
Because we all know like how much legislation these guys and gals are digesting during legislative sessions, and it's like, I don't want to hope that they go find that themselves. Like, I think that should be delivered to them as a part of the report and the recommendations.
So we'll make sure that it's kind of
Yeah,
all navigable.
it'll be navigable, there'll be the footnotes I provide, like on sense by sense basis. I think I can hyperlink to the compilation of comments that should go to the exact page number.
That's excellent.
So if I think about.
And I'll just add that some of what happens in the compilation, it's not to like dilute or distill too much what we've received in written comments. It's actually, we've worked, Hugh, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're like incorporating comments from meetings, written comments we've received. So we've tried to find a place to centralize so that people can kind of skim and understand at a slightly higher level, kind of what the balance of views was, but those aren't the, so we'll make sure that those links are in there to make, essentially, you want to have various doorways for people to come in and find the same thing that they're looking for. So that's what we're looking.
Okay, well, that,
I think so.
I think so.
We'll see.
Yes,
Well, time will tell.
but I think channeling, and Andrea, you said this earlier, like thinking about the audience that will be potentially using this. So like, how do you make that valuable for legislators? Tucker, I appreciate your comment around kind of the credibility of folks around the room who are putting in the due diligence to assess, analyze, and put on the record. So, I think if you're holding that as kind of the spirit of the ask,
Right.
being as creative as possible to make it easy. Andrea, you look like you're ready to.
Since Andrea Kreiner with the Oregon Association of Conservation Districts, and actually I'm putting on my hat as being a former director of the Delaware Energy Office. I'm not speaking as that, but it does relate to the conservation districts as well, because coming into this, a lot of the conservation district concerns have to do with land use, right? And have to do with using land, valuable, farming or natural lands to provide power for urban areas. So this is like paradigm blowing things that are just in my head since yesterday with some new information I learned about the growth of solar everywhere else in the world. And that is looking at, and we kind of discussed it a little bit during the work group meetings about, trying to more intensively utilize commercial and industrial rooftops. We have a comment to that. That's not, you'll get that. But I'm thinking more, and when we brought up the concept of I forget who mentioned the generators that people are using. We keep thinking about our electricity system, our energy system, as this system of the wires and pipes and stuff that we're used to. And then when we talk about resiliency, we talk about distributed, but we're talking about distributed wires and pipes, right, in smaller systems. And if you look at opportunities that are being raised, like for example, we talk about how can we make solar more accessible to everybody, right? Utah passed a law this session allowing balcony solar, which is basically plug-in. Like, how can we? So this is like something we didn't even discuss this, and that's why I'm sitting here. I'm like hesitating to say it, but if I don't say it, I'm gonna shoot myself. Is how can we remove the barriers to what can be a huge change in the system so that we don't have to necessarily wait for more wires and pipes to be put in place, right? And I don't know how you build that into the report now at this point, because we didn't really talk about it. But gosh darn, this is an opportunity, and this is a changing, getting rid of bureaucracies is not a cost item, right? This is and so if you're talking about where do we go from here, maybe, that's something to think about.
Well,
I'm just, I apologize for bringing this in now, but.
No, that's all right. But maybe it's skipping a little bit about kind of some of the next steps and how y'all are approaching it. Because, obviously what came up in the advisory group is not the end all be all for what Odo has heard or will hear. So maybe the question, Edith, is, as you all are thinking about incorporating what could be a deluge of comments from all different types of actors and individuals and organizations, how, because your comment, like, we didn't talk about here, so how would that get in? I think there's potentially a lot of things that this group didn't talk about, or the working groups didn't talk about, or interagency. I don't know if there's a lot of things. But there's probably a lot of things covered, but like, how are you all thinking about the ability to kind of incorporate something that maybe hasn't risen up to a level of visibility?
It wouldn't have come in the analysis that we did. Right.
I will mention a place in the analysis where it did, and where I think we can build on the modeling that we did to continue these conversations. But so we modeled a scenario that was high distributed resources and limited transmission development, essentially only reconductoring. And that scenario kind of shows you the resource mix that comes out and the value, one of which was avoided transmission distribution costs of focusing on distributed resources. So I think that it's a good example of where I think we haven't fully leveraged all of the modeling work that we did. I don't think that we could in an energy strategy in one document, but I think one of the things that I would like to see is that some of that technical analysis serve as a resource moving forward to move these conversations forward. In the so I already read your comments and
This wasn't even in there because they said.
yeah, no, it's fine. But no, I mean, so I just want to say I'm hearing you. So I'm not gonna. It's not worth kind of. I promised myself that I wouldn't like respond individually to comments that were coming in today. But I think that the broader piece that I want to add here too is that, you know, in some cases, it's such a fast changing landscape. There could be an action that we got wrong, right? But I think that it's why I led with the first thing we thought about when we thought about the actions was what was the thing that we need? Because I don't think that that's going to change. And by the thing we need, I don't mean the specific technology that we need, but you know we need transmission. I know that there are rumors of a cap and trade bill and of interest in cap and trade, right? Should something like that take off, what does it mean for this action? I don't know, but it's an example of one of those areas that's evolving where, you know, in a year or two, we don't know what the state of discussions will be. And so we're hoping that by having defined what the priorities are, that we help we help inform the conversation moving forward. And none of what I just said as a hypothetical was meant to be taken as it was just a hypothetical that came to mind because it's what some of the buzz is in the air, right? It's nothing more than that, not an Odo position. But I don't know if that's helpful, but I think, you know, for distributed resources or an example where I could find lots of places where there's an opening. There's some good evidence, but we maybe haven't taken the conversation as far as it could go. And I think we're really open to how we take that conversation forward further. I hope that's helpful as an illustration of.
I think I just want to add a quick thing to this. At a high level, the energy strategy is meant to be that basis from which we all can discuss policy development. And so not just in the alternative scenario, but in our reference scenario, the one that's the least cost path to get us where we want to go, there is a chunk that we need to meet of our future load with demand response distributed energy resources. That's a place where we can start a conversation about how do we get there? What are the things that we need to do to make this pretty big lift in getting these resources out there? How do we get there? And so the point is that we all stand on that as a platform and then be able to say, okay, now we're going to have the conversation about what the options are to get where we want to go.
Rebecca?
Your comment sparked in me, and let me know if I'm off base in making this connection, but you mentioned, reducing bureaucracy, and I know there has been conversation at various points in this process, and I don't remember all 42 recommendations, so I don't remember if or how it may have been included in recommendation, but there has been a lot of discussion around how can we streamline certain processes if and when we decide that it's worthwhile, if it's siting and permitting, if it's something else. And so I do think that is definitely a thread of discussion that I hope to see continued. And certainly, I've had conversations with, agency staff in Washington where they're like, oh yeah, no, we had to pass a bill. So COUs had the authority to do this, or, they had the authority to do this, or we had to give transits the authority to, produce hydrogen on site, or all these just different little things. And so I think having that consciousness of where maybe some of that bureaucracy is and where there might be opportunities to streamline it without sacrificing, our communities or cost or environmental integrity.
Thanks, Rebecca. Corey? Corey Scott, I thought I saw you come off mute, or maybe your hand just went down. Is Corey on mute?
Corey's on.
He's muted, right?
Can you unmute him, Josh? There we go. There we go. You're unmuted, Corey. You're there.
Corey, if you're talking to us, we can't hear you. Maybe you're typing your comment, because I feel like I hear.
Maybe it was a random hand.
Maybe a random hand.
I've done that before.
Me too.
No, I didn't.
When you're on the phone, you ran.
Yeah,
Oh,
okay, maybe
on the
mute Corey
phone,
again.
it's, is it called in? Because that's *9.
Oh,
Try that, maybe?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
yes.
Oh, yes, you're right. I was on the phone, and sorry, I put my hand down, just not realizing we were trying to finish up here in the next few minutes. But I will mention that I was silent in the previous version. I certainly wanted to add my thanks. This has been a totally fascinating conversation. I'm Corey Scott from Pacific Power, for those who don't know me. And really this last kind of ramp down through the last few minutes have got me rethinking a comment that I think you'll see from us, and one that I kind of reflecting on overall as people have been talking, which is the fundamentals of how energy affordability have been captured in the plan. It's there in different places, but I'm asking myself how we're viewing all of these recommendations through the lens of affordability, which is a different scale than how energy affordability is contemplated, at least in the draft. And so it's just something I wanted to mention. I heard a lot of similar comments. The word cost, the word least cost was used a number of times, but certainly something you've got me thinking about through this conversation, and I'll leave it at that for now, knowing we're trying to wrap up. And thank you for the great work.
All right. Thanks, Corey. So y'all ran out the clock on saying all the nice things. In our last few minutes, maybe we'll, if we could pull up the slides, I'll ask folks to maybe collectively think about this, and maybe we could talk about next steps. Maybe I'll ask the Odo team to create some space for you all to reflect back, some appreciation. Maybe this is, we tell folks there's another meeting already? Yes, right?
We did when I jumped on you.
So, yeah, that's right. Right at the beginning, that's right.
It was made abundantly clear.
Very clear, you're not done yet. So I'm gonna just put this on the slide for now. And when we come back to our last meeting, I'm gonna ask folks to come back to this, because and maybe it'll even be more valuable. Because you'll have seen then the final draft. And then I'll force you to say nice things about the final draft and about the process, while we may create some space to also do some additional reflection. So I'm just gonna leave that. But I do wanna, if we go to the next slide, what is the next slide? Closing. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm gonna start with Edith. And then maybe I'll offer some final thoughts, next steps, and then we'll close. But I'm going to start with you, Edith, and then I want to just open it up to any other Odo staff that wants to reflect some appreciation and reflection.
So the process of developing energy strategy is not about being right. It's about finding a way forward. And everybody in this room and online and in this group is going to play a role in what happens next. And so I think that the fact that we've managed to come together throughout this process has been really valuable, because it's kept us communicating throughout the process. And throughout the process is really hard. Everybody around here also has a really hard job and represents constituents who you're accountable to. And so I just really appreciate that. And in advance, we'll thank you for your comments. And I'm sure many of them will be hard, and I'll thank you for those hard comments too, because those are really valuable. And I also will venture to promise that our next meeting won't be 3 hours long. We want to make sure to have a meeting so that we can talk about next steps, so we can reflect back on the strategy. I think I would leave you all with the seed planted of kind of how you envision your role moving forward as it relates to the energy strategy, whether it's useful to continue to have some form where we meet together. I know that, I think Diane, maybe you or somebody else had mentioned, is there going to be some kind of structure to move conversations forward? So I think that's a question that maybe I'll leave in the air, but just appreciate you all helping to kind of inform us and keep us on track and keep us on that track of finding a path forward, recognizing that there's no right or wrong, even though sometimes in the public dialogue, that's what it feels like. It's not reality. And so just really appreciate everybody showing up and contributing. So thank you.
Right. We'll just open up any other Odo staff reflections.
I wanted to have the last word, which my husband would say is not unusual for me, but I won't if others want to join in. But I just want to first thank everyone in this room, whether you're from Odo, Kearns and West, or the many members of the advisory group. This has been one of the most delightful discussions around the future of any state, any governmental thought process going on that I've heard in the last 8 years. Everything's so polarized now. We can't have conversations where we're looking for common ground. We can't have conversations where we think about the things that will get us to the goals that we all want. And this has been, honestly, one of the, by the way, I'm a notable crier, so if I get teary, just know it's normal, it's genetic. I just can't tell you how much I appreciate the conversations that happen in this room and online. It's been wonderful, and it gives me hope in a time where sometimes I feel like there's not a lot of hope out there. I just want to give you genuine appreciation for pushing us at Odo, for challenging the assumptions that we make, for raising up the voices of the people that you feel like we may not have taken into full consideration. That is invaluable to us, and we appreciate that more than we can probably ever express. I'm so grateful for this team back here. They work tirelessly to bring all of the information that we've used to have these conversations. They believe in the work that is happening here. It's not just a job. This is their passion. It is the thing that drives them every morning, is to get up and know that they can help contribute to all the hard work that we as a state are going to be working on. In the end, I just want to say it is the sharing of information and communicating openly that will be the driver to helping us get to our goals and be successful in the state. And that has been exemplified in this group. And my hope for the state of Oregon is that all conversations around these things are more like this and less like what we see outside of the state. So thank you.
All right, well, here. If we go to the next slide, thank you. And like I said, we'll build some space, hopefully at our so as been mentioned a few times, September 22nd, the public comments are due. I think y'all have offered some opportunity and challenge for Odo to think about and how to represent and visualize those public comments as not just in the short term, but connected to the final product. As you see, November 1st, production final report to the governor and legislature. And then we'll seek after that date to have an advisory group meeting to kind of wrap up this part of the process and journey that you all have been on. And so again, I'll provide the teaser for some reflections, what's going to leave us with hope. Jessica gave us a good model for like, what are you hopeful for? What do you kind of see as possible once you've seen the final draft? And then I think we have one more slide. It just says thank you, I think. Oh, no, public comments. Don't forget, the portal, the Power App portal is available. Again, September 22nd. So that's today's the 18th. So I know some have already come in, just mindful of the date. Now we have one last slide that I think just says thank you. So it's a privilege to share the space. Appreciate all the candor today and throughout this process. much love. Appreciate you. Folks are staying for lunch. We'll break some bread. For those online, have a wonderful day. 12 o'clock on the dot with a late start. Good job.
Nicely done.
Have a good one.
Thanks, everyone.